I have to say, I'm not one of those rabid McConnell haters. I'm not. And I know there are a lot on Team Trump, and I get it, totally get it. But I personally can't get over all the good he did for the country when it comes to Article 3 judges and the Supreme Court. Like, we would not have the Supreme Court that we have if it weren't for Mitch McConnell. He is a true blue conservative, dyed-in-the-wool Republican. But he hates Trump, and Trump hates him. And this has turned into a problem for Republicans and Trump in the country. And now he's voted against Hegseth, Tulsi, and RFKJ, which leads us where on Mitch McConnell, guys? I hate to put you in the crosshairs because I know, you used to work
listen,
from home.
I mean, it's a fair question. I mean, first off, I should say the last time I provided him any advice on how to vote was in 2014, 11 long years ago. But I think where this is, my first takeaway is the Trump administration and John Thune and Barrasso in the Senate have done an incredible job to get nominees who entered into the public discussion in a very controversial place where there was some concern inside of a traditional Republican Party about how RFK, for example, who's had, sort of famously liberal positions on a whole bunch of healthcare issues would fare in that context. And throughout the course of the nomination process, these folks work together in a way that we haven't really seen a lot of. Even Democrats are really not as good as what I've seen over the last 3 weeks in repairing those, getting face-to-face conversations and getting people to a point where they're not going to lose any of these people, right? I mean, every single piece of the confirmation puzzle has come together. Now, where does that leave McConnell? I think that's more indicative of the change in the Republican Party and his sort of the lack of pressure that he feels personally. You have a whole bunch of Republicans, and this is for real. Like, people ought to know this. There's probably a third of that Senate conference that is a little concerned about the way that Tulsi has talked about intelligence apparatus.
We saw that at her hearing.
10 years, right? And they're more than a little concerned. If she was a Democratic nominee, they would have voted to absolutely crush that nomination.
Agreed.
But the political power of Trump, and part of what he's done over the last 3 weeks in terms of picking issues and having 60% of the American people on side of it, is forcing everybody to a position to reevaluate this. Ultimately, they work for Donald Trump. And that's what it is that they're voting to support. Do they have misgivings about Tulsi Gabbard or maybe RFK and the way that he's going to handle the question of abortion in HHS? Sure, they do. They're going to have issues with that. But ultimately, they trust Donald Trump. Where McConnell comes into all of that is he's just sort of traditionally where he's always been, but the party has moved. And the party is very much a Trump party. He is a Reagan Republican. And I think if you were to go back in time in some kind of like a Marty McFly DeLorean and look at the way a Republican Party, 20 years ago would have evaluated these nominations, it looks very much like the way that he has. I don't think that he's doing what he's doing out of spite for Donald Trump. It's just he doesn't feel the same political
pressures. If it were spiteful, Holmes, he would have voted against Rubio.
Yeah, exactly right. And he's obviously not going to do that. He thinks that Rubio is a terrific nomination from what I read in his statements.
Yeah,
but I also think he's going to be a force for good in terms of the team as you get into these thorny issues of reconciliation and budget and taxes and all of these things, because his ideology hasn't changed a lick. It is just not reflected when you get into that more libertarian area of defense and foreign affairs in particular, where a lot of Republicans still have issues with that. He just doesn't feel the same political pressures as everybody else who's going to vote.
Yeah, he's more like a National Review Republican still. Like those guys too.
That's right.
They actually, some have TDS, but like Rich Lowry, he's great. He doesn't have TDS. He actually can see Trump pretty clearly, but he disagrees with him on a few things, and he's constantly defending him on many other things. But yeah, I don't think he's a Tulsi fan. I don't remember, but I know the editors have not backed Tulsi and they have not backed RFKJ. So I take your point. I actually think that's pretty interesting. And that's a position he's allowed to have. I mean, he's how many years of public service has the guy had? But when you find yourself on the opposite end of Trump, especially as a Republican like he is, the party will turn on you. That's what's happening to him. And I hate to see it because I think he's a good man. I think he's a principled man. And the party apparatus is just like turned on him because he seems like a Trump antagonist, even though like Trump said all the mean things about his wife. I mean, it's just, it's like, it's complicated.
I mean, it's gone both ways, but I think the story is not told yet, Megyn. I think what's going to happen very quickly is we're going to get into a legislative discussion where the crux of the Trump agenda has to be litigated. And this is the hardest part. What he's done so far has been unbelievably great. But ultimately, you're going to need Congress to try to work some of these things through. And your taxes are going up $5,000 for your average American if they don't. So there's real consequences here. I think somebody like McConnell, ultimately, there may be a point where he actually does have a significant amount of influence in trying to get people on board for the big win on the things that will actually
let me follow
come
up
to
with you on
define.
that. Because we try very hard to avoid getting too deep into the budget here on the MK Show for all sorts of reasons. I refer you back to my high school guidance counselor's college recommendation for me. It was my college recommendation. Megyn does well in English and social studies. Math and science aren't Meg's thing. In my recommendation, who writes that? Anyway, so I try to avoid the math when I can, but what's going to happen with the budget is going to be probably the most consequential thing of the Trump presidency.
No question.
And the thing about, about budget reconciliation is the Democrats can't block that. They don't need 60 votes. The Republicans don't need 60 votes to get a vote on basically financial matters, on the budget. They only need a majority of 51. And they have that. They have 53 Republican senators, so they can afford to lose, a couple. They actually only need 50 because they have J.D. Vance who could break a tie. But they've got a majority, so they should be able to get the budget through that the Republicans want, unless some go rogue. And you're saying Mitch McConnell could be the stalwart that keeps, because it will be controversial. They'll be shoving a lot into that reconciliation bill because they don't need a 60 vote, 60 votes in the Senate to get cloture, meaning a vote on it at all. They have a low threshold to pass it, so they're going to shove a lot of stuff in there that they want. It's going to be controversial, which will cause some more moderate Republicans to try to peel off. And your point is, it's in that moment in which Mitch McConnell's true influence in the Senate could prove pivotal.
Yeah, I think it is. And I should warn your viewers and listeners that the last math class I took was actually called math. So, this is not my area of expertise, but I do know how the process works. And ultimately, anytime you're working with razor thin margins, 3 votes in the Senate, 2 until April in the House of Representatives, every single member that matters. And ultimately, where these things get settled out is if you get somebody who, look, they haven't been on the team. They're not like a partisan stalwart. They're always going to vote for the Trump agenda no matter what's in it. When those kind of people end up coming to the rest of their colleagues and saying, look, this is really important for the country, it has added weight to it, particularly in somebody who led the Republican Party for, years and years, the longest serving leader in history. So I think it is going to. And I ultimately believe that he's going to dig his heels in and try to provide as much legislative heft as he can on issues like that, where at the end of the day, the Trump administration will be judged based on the outcome of those reconciliation bills.
We continue to face uncertainty when it comes to the economy, with a perfect storm brewing as Social Security and Medicare hit a breaking point as the largest generation is hitting retirement. It's not a good confluence of events. A smaller workforce means a smaller tax base. You pair all this with our growing national debt and rising cost of living, we could have a very big problem on our hands. So, what are you doing right now to protect your family for the future? Gold can be a safe haven in hard economic times, and Birch Gold makes it easy to diversify a portion of your savings into physical gold. Birch Gold will help you transition an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold, and it does not cost you 1 penny out of pocket. Protect your future today. Text MK to 989898 and get your free info kit on gold, as well as a copy of the Ultimate Guide for Gold in the Trump Era with a foreword by Donald Trump Jr. There's no obligation, just information. Birch Gold has earned the trust of countless Americans looking to safeguard their savings. Text my initials MK to the number 989898 today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.